So I read both versions, and Gotts goes to Rick's house, and they're talking, yada yada yada. And Rick really goes into details about the Burroughs family, and he remembers. I think the Burroughs family was originally in England, but they wound up moving to Norway because they wound up, I guess, um, something happened. I think something in regards to their reputation, so they wound up moving to Norway, and in Norway, Rick, I believe, worked for the Burroughs as the butler. And if you guys remember Simon, um, Mary Burroughs' husband, um, he wind up firing all of the servants of the manor, which they never mentioned in the video game. But yeah, he wound up firing all the servants of the manor, and he did that because he knew that Mary was pregnant and that she was pregnant with pretty much evil, Bobby and Dan, and he wanted to try and rid, kind of like, to deal with that evil, but he wanted to make sure that the servants were not there, as to, for their safety, of course, And also, Simon winds up going in, confiding in Rick a lot of, details about his family's history in regards to, like, one of his family members, Theodore Burroughs. And he was pretty much like, the first lord of the castle. Um, and I think this was back in England, because it's kind of split between Norway and England. But this was back in England, and this was back in like the mid 15th century. And Theodore Burroughs, after fighting, coming back from the Hundred Years' War, he came back with a paralyzing fear of death. Um, so out of that fear and terror, he wound up selling his soul to a pagan god in exchange for what he thought was immortality. And Simon confided all of this in the in to his butler Rick. So Rick is telling Gotts this story, and he made a pact with the god of death known as the Great Father. Um, and in exchange for, so he sold his soul, and then that dark, the Great Father, he demanded sacrifices. So Theodore wound up abducting children from the surrounding area, and after torturing them, he butchered them and offered them to his deity. So pretty much human sacrifices, using children as human sacrifices. So that's kind of like the origin of where this all started from. The whole Scissor Man thing. And rumors of Theodore's inhumane ways spread through the populace, and his relatives feared that the king would hear about this, so his relatives wound up poisoning him, and he died. But Theodore had set something in motion, which was a cycle of this kind of like dark deity continuing to haunt the Burroughs family. And every few generations, a deformed child came to be born to the Burroughs. Born from a human womb, not yet human itself. And these would be considered like the sons of the Great Father. Kind of like how angels are. They make that comparison, but like these aren't like good, good people and good spirits. They're like bad people. So like angels were like the opposite of angels. I guess demons. However, as the story goes on, they wind up going into the mid 19th century and talking about Quentin Burroughs. And Quentin Burroughs plays a significant role in the story because he wants to break the curse that the Burroughs family has on itself. And he makes a direct stand against the evil deity. And he was able to destroy one of, the sons of the great father, but he wasn't able to fulfill his complete mission. So his mission was incomplete when he died. So after Quentin's death, the Burroughs clan crossed the sea to Norway, where all was quiet for about 80 years. But then, by Simon Burroughs' days, the accursed Burroughs blood reared its head again. You know, aware of this, Simon wanted to fight the dark deity. He fired all his servants and steadily made preparations for his battle. But it all came to naught. So, that was the story that the butler Rick told Gotts, Inspector Gotts. So yeah, that was like that right there was not a part of the game. They did not go into all that detail, all those details about the family's history, because that really brings everything together. Like, okay, this kind of makes more sense now, So then at this point, like, Rick's dog begins to bark. In the story I read, his name is Victor, but in the video game, his name is Kojo, and I think that's like a reference to like a Stephen King movie or something. But yeah, Victor starts barking, his dog, and he goes out to sea, but then his dog suddenly attacks him, and Gantz is like, kind of like, what the heck? He sees, his dog, has like probably pretty much like bitten like his throat out, and then closes the door and goes back into the house, and then this weird creepy moment happens where like Gantz is in the house, and he notices like he hears this little shing, 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 shing. Not Scissorman shing, but kind of like a chandelier moving. And Rick, he had noticed that chandelier from the beginning. When he entered Rick's house, like, wow, that's a beautiful chandelier. So when he's walking by, he sort of hears that chandelier move slightly, like shh, shh. And he's thinking, like, wait a minute, where's that sound coming from? Because all the windows are closed. Then the chandelier falls, and then once the chandelier falls, Scissorman comes. So then Gotts has this encounter with Scissorman, and he's shooting him like he does in the video game, but he's shooting him in like areas like all over, and first, like, none of it's working, and he's like, okay, maybe he's wearing body armor. Okay, he shoots him in like the leg. I'm like, okay, maybe he's wearing like some other type of armor or something. Then he shoots him like square in the forehead, but it doesn't stop Scissorman. So he's like, wait a minute, like something's up here. So then I think Gott wound up shooting the glass door, and I think shooting the dog in the process, and then running out of the glass door, I believe. And it's raining at this point too. And then he gets into his car and drives off. And then he turns around because he wants to see Scissorman leave the house. But he never sees Scissorman leaves the house. And then he winds up going down to the police station or whatever. Or either backup comes and then he goes to the police station. So yeah, so that pretty much that's Gotts' scenario too. However, Helen also has a scenario too, the library. And I will say that I think that Helen's story in the video game is kind of like the hard mode of the game. Because I think in Helen's story, you have to do a bit more to advance in the game than in Jennifer's story. And also, I'll say that the library is probably one of my favorite scenarios of the game. And also, I think it's probably one of the toughest scenarios of the game, other than the final scenario. And the reason I say that is because in the library scenario in the video game, you have 3 mandatory encounters with Scissorman. You cannot skip those encounters. You have to go through them. So it's like the first one when Professor Sullivan is you and Professor Sullivan are in the clock tower, and then Scissorman shows up, and then Sullivan dies. So that's one. And then another one is where you hear Edward's voice, and you have to go up again to the same area, and then you get your foot caught in the chains. So that's another one. And then the last one is when you go into the collections room, and you see Scissorman in the collections room posing as a statue. And as well, there's not many weapons in the library. You can use a lamp, I think, and you can use a photocopier. And there's only one hiding place, and that's behind the desk. So yeah, the library is probably one of the toughest scenarios in the game. And as well, I think it's probably one of my favorite scenarios for some reason. And also, Helen is the only character that can play the library too. No other character in Clock Tower can play the library scenario except Helen. Okay, so let's go into Helen's library scenario here. All right, so this is if Helen goes and gets the information from the library instead of Got's going to get the information from Rick. All right, so Helen goes to the library, and she's talking with Professor Sullivan, and he's kind of like explaining things to her, and then he gives her like this book, and it's kind of like a book that you know, deals with, you know, important families in, you know, history, and the Burroughs family is in this book, and she reads about the Burroughs family in this book, and she winds up finding out pretty much the same information, more or less, that Rick told Gotts. A little different, but pretty much she finds out like the Burroughs were like the Lord Wardens of the March of Northern England. They were like guarding the border between England and Scotland. That was kind of like their duty. And I think that might be pretty much it. And I think in both of those scenarios, you get the statue, you know, the demonic statue or whatever. But I would say the library scenario in the book was a slight disappointment, a little slightly. But the library scenario plays out a little different, and it makes a bit more sense in the book. Mainly, Professor Sullivan's death makes more sense. In the video game, he sticks his head out of like a hole in the clock tower, and then like the hand cuts off his head. But in the book, he winds up getting caught, like his clothing winds up getting caught in a gear, and Helen is trying to stop the gear by, like, you know, pulling the lever or whatever, but it's not working, and he winds up getting, you know, sucked and crushed into the gears of the clock tower, courtesy of Scissorman. And then there's like some scene where like Helen gets like wrapped up in all these chains, sort of similar to how it happens in the video game, except for she gets wrapped up in chains instead of just like the chain, you know, hooking her foot, you know. But ultimately she makes it out, and before she makes it out though, she encounters Edward in the library, and she still notices that he is still here. You know, Edward was in the library while Helen was in the library before all this happened. You know, before this happened, they were at closing time, but now it's past closing time, and all this crime and murder has happened, you know, and Edward is still here. And Helen, I guess, winds up finding a way out for Edward. I think it's pretty much the same thing, like the vent. Um, let's see. I think Edward's hiding place was a little different this time around. I know in the video game he hid in like under a desk, and then Helen found him. But in the book, I think he hides behind. He hides in the locker, which I found was strange. Sorry about that. It took a minute. But yeah, he hides in the locker. I was like, huh, and they had lockers in libraries? But yeah, she found him in the locker. And then she winds up helping him get out. And then I think at that point, there's another, like, Gotts winds up showing up. And then, like, Helen, in one of her vulnerable moments with Gotts, she winds up, you know, fainting into his arms, I believe. Which happens in the video game as well. Let's see. Yeah, she lost consciousness in Gotts's arms. So, like I said, Gotts and Helen, if you read the story, you'll see that their relationship in the book is not quite the same as their relationship in the video game. The relationship in the book is strained. It's not the friendliest relationship. But oddly enough, I think Helen does view Gotts as, I guess, a safe space or a safe place, because she does have her most vulnerable moments in the book, in her story with Gotts, like like her most vulnerable moments where she can just let go and not be the strong person and just just let him hold her. And by the way, they don't really have like a romantic thing going on because I think Gotts is married. So, yeah, no shipping that. And then after this library scenario or whatever, I think Helen's at the hospital or something. Then the police investigate. And then they want to get into a point. There's a lot more that goes into this, but I'm going to try to speed it up. They want to get into a point where they're like, okay, let's go to the Burroughs mansion in England.